Welcome to episode 3 on the journey to conscious healthcare, where we explore what it takes to consciously create longevity, happiness and fulfillment in your life and that of others. The journey to conscious healthcare looks at the healthcare industry, disability sector, and how to best navigate these areas to get the best for you and your life. I'm your host, Trevor Keane, and I'm the founder and CEO of Trevor Keane Health Services, an expert company that is known for high-quality healthcare services and transforming the healthcare industry in the disability space. This series is on the support coordinators in the disability space, called the do's and don'ts of support coordination. Today's show is sponsored by Trevor Keane Health Services. At Trevor Keane Health Services, we provide high-quality NDIS healthcare services in the comfort of your own home. If you're interested in an easy and reliable way to navigate the NDIS and access healthcare services, please get in touch. Today's guest has experience internationally, having run businesses before, and is also the proud mother of 3 children. She loves supporting individuals, personally or professionally, to create the success that they desire, and in the past 12 months has moved into a role of a support coordinator. Exhibiting traits of passion, dedication, and being solution-focused, as well as being a strong communicator, makes her an ideal candidate for this role. Kirsty Bonner, welcome, and thanks for joining us today from Auscare Support.
Thanks, Trevor. It's nice to be here.
Not a worry at all. Well, let's jump in. I know we had a bit of a pre-conversation in regards to a couple personal questions, and I'd really love to know, if you had a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say?
I think the first thing that came to mind is a quote I think that Theodore Roosevelt said, that was, "Believe you can and you're halfway there."
Yeah,
and
wow.
Yeah, I just think that in so many areas in life that kind of connects for me, because most of it is the belief, whether it's in learning or business or, personally or sport or whatever it is, you have to have belief in the beginning.
Yeah, well, I think it resonates quite a lot. We sort of go back into a bit of your journey. You've had quite a lot of start outs with businesses, and you've done some pretty interesting things. I'd love to know how that's translated to where you are today.
Well, I lived in Holland with my husband 1999 to 2002, and we were over there for his work. And while I was over there, I did some volunteer work, and then I worked for Sun Microsystems. And by the time we were leaving there and coming back, I was about 4 weeks off having my first baby. So we moved back to Australia. Of course, I'd been not working in Australia for a few years. My husband came back with his work, and I came back going, okay, what exactly am I going to do? And I loved being a mum. I just loved being a mum and being around for my son. And so I had him. 12 months later, I fell pregnant with my second. So there's about 20 months between the two of them. But by that time, I started to get itchy feet, to be like, okay, I sort of want something else that's for me as well. And I had a letter in the letterbox that was just a random mail out to previous customers of a franchise that I received. And I think it's a bit like that belief thing. I just went, oh, I could do this. I really think this could be something, like, it looked affordable to get into, and it was baby related. So for me at that time, it really resonated with where I was. So I guess, to cut a long story short, that started me down buying a small franchise, building that up, and then selling that off to move into working for myself for 13 years. So I sort of have done project after project that was learning from one thing to another. That's where it began. Before I was back in sort of the healthcare sector, where I was working as a sleep apnea consultant prior to support coordination, I ran a business that was about helping women in business with a lovely OT who is now working in the NDIS space, funnily enough, called Courts Lippert. So her and I ran a business helping women in business. So, I don't know. I think as your life journey changes, what works for you and your family changes. And I was just always open to learning. So, I've constantly evolved as I've gotten older.
Well, it certainly sounds like you like the diversity. You're a very caring person, and I think that fits very naturally in your support coordination role. And I think also in regards to I think you like solving problems.
Yes.
I think, like as in you're not sort of scared of a challenge. And I think following on from your first sort of billboard quote, I think it's really important that you believe in yourself. And fundamentally, if you're trying to help people, it sounds, like it's a good mix for you to find a zone where you're quite engaged and energized with what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because support coordination is all about solving problems. Sometimes it's first about working out what the problem is that needs to be solved, and then just working out what are all the pieces of the puzzle that need to get put in place to make the link, make the chain so that you can actually achieve whatever the goals are that you're trying to achieve, which obviously with participants, it's all about them.
Oh, absolutely. And I think whilst we're on that, I know you've got a bit of a good news story to share. I'd love to hear a bit about it. I think it might have been your first participant you were working with.
Yeah. I mean, it was the first participant that I worked with, because through the beginning mentoring sort of stages, it was quite a challenging case. And so not something you would normally take on as your first participant. But I had a great mentor that I was working with, and together I ended up sort of taking the lead, but I had her sort of in the background all the time supporting me. And this was a participant that was living in a unit at a caravan park and was being evicted. And this was just before Christmas last year. So they'd been given time before they needed to move out, and they didn't have anywhere to go. They were newly on the NDIS schedule and had, a plan, but it wasn't significant enough. And they didn't really have any family support other than a friend that had been working with her. And between her friend and myself, we managed to get her a house, a small unit, not very far away. Of course, the participants are connected to where they live or where they're familiar with living. So they want to try and stay in that same space. So that's what we did. And we got her in a couple of weeks before Christmas, got her a new electric bed and got her some support so that her friend could move a little bit out of the carer role, have his own life, and she could build some really good connections with some supports for her, because trust is really important. And so she managed to start to build some great trust. So it was an amazing 8 to 10 weeks that we had to really push and communicate between, the caravan park and housing SA and like everything that's, an uphill battle sometimes. But it all came together and it was amazing.
Well, it sounds like it was quite a nice Christmas present because it was all before Christmas. Am I right?
Just before Christmas. I think it was like the 18th of December or something she had to be out by. It was crazy.
Well, yeah, so it's almost a year ago today as such. We're sort of coming along that time of year. And I suppose whilst we're on that topic about being sort of new to the role, so you are relatively new to the role as a support coordinator. I'd love to sort of know what the key for you has been in regards to hitting the ground running in your role.
Yeah, I think the fundamental thing that helped me was working with a great team when I first started. So Cassie Day took me on down at the carer's place, and Jo Cook took me under her wing, and the whole team down there were amazing. And having good people that are experienced already within the space was a great supervisory, mentorship for me to sort of get stuck right in, as well as not having too much expected from a number of, like I say, I had one key participant and I sort of tagged along on a few others so that I could get some initial meetings and stuff under my belt. I was comfortable with talking to people and getting to know what they needed, but NDIS is a whole new world, right? Like, you can't come in here without knowing anything about the NDIS. So number one, learning that you never know everything anyway. And so you've got to come in knowing that either you know it, and in the beginning you don't know what, or you're going to find it out. And always being honest and upfront with that, I think with families or nominees or the participants, is fundamental. And that's what I did right from that beginning, is just going, look, if I don't know it, I'll find it out. But if I do know it, I'll do everything I can to, support. And they're a great team to get started with.
I'm sort of hearing a couple of themes out of that. It's about being really caring and also just like a thirst for knowledge and trying to help. So caring, I think, just means that you go above and beyond. So if there's something to find out, it sounds like you're just willing to do that. And in having that sort of role, you've got people around you that have helped you, guide you if you were a bit lost, say.
Yeah, I think the whole knowing what you know, but knowing that there's so much you don't know, was always something from even before coming into this role. So it was a natural thing to be aware of in coming into it, and always being prepared to sort of ask or find out what you need to know. Because no matter how much experience you've had in the space, in any space, there's always going to be something that comes up that you're like, whoa, haven't dealt with that before, or haven't helped in that space, or haven't had, because, you just can't know it all. So,
that's really good. And I think there's a couple of things we spoke about prior as well in regards to like some mentors, and I'd love to sort of know mentors. You've mentioned a couple already, but like as in best pieces of advice. Now, feel free to list as many as you want, but I'd love to sort of know what bits of advice you got and how they've helped you in your journey, because you're seemingly very headstrong might be the right word, but like nice and steady with how you go about it. I think it's really maybe to do with some mentors and some advice you've got.
Yeah, I've got a couple of mentors now at Auscare, Vanessa Gange and Joe McIntyre. But on top of that, being part of a team has been awesome because they've all got a much wider range of experience combined, right? So together, when you can say, oh, look, I've got a participant with XYZ, has anyone had this or come across that? Just having that network to be able to do that with is crucial. But knowing that things change and things evolve as well, so making sure that you can find out the new information and being on top of it with all of those guys. So those guys have really been a great mentor there. As I said, Cassie Day, Joe Cook, and all of the guys down south to the Heroes Place were amazing. But yeah, just always learning, always looking to improve and always looking to understand changes or differences, but listening to the participant is crucial to make sure that you're either hearing what it is they need and that that's what you're working on, as well as the priority of things for them, because what you might assume they need or what you might assume is a priority may not be for them. So it's really important to make sure that, number one, you're listening to the participant and then working from there, working out by speaking to others what are the fundamental things we now need to put into place for those goals to be reached or those, initial problems to be solved, like you said, problem solving. Maybe it's home modifications, maybe it's a wheelchair, maybe it's just getting out more socially in the community. You've got to understand those things so that you're not starting at the wrong end when you're helping them.
Yeah, and I think on that note, you're sort of saying about, I'm hearing a theme here in regards to there's freedom, choice and control, and you've got your own prejudices, we all do when we go into something where, what you think's important might not be the same to another.
Yeah.
It sounds very OT related. I know there's also an OT that I think sort of helped you out a bit as well, and you've got some connections with as well that sort of might have slanted that a little bit. Yeah,
well, Courts that I was talking about before, having been an OT prior to us meeting, and then now the fact that she's gone back into OT and we can kind of bounce around ideas, even though we're coming from different roles, we both need one another, even though I don't think we've even had any, referrals back and forth or people that are participants that have needed one another, but we've certainly been able to work off of our relationship to then expand on how we know we could support the other person in that situation.
I think that's great because it's really about the person being the centre of their own life and understanding and having that control and autonomy and really being a support to that and help facilitate. On that note then, as we sort of go in, so information, there's lots of it out there, whether it be phone calls, whatever else is on the internet, all sorts of things. Where do you go to get your information?
Well, we're really fortunate at Auscare. We do have the DSC training that's provided to us, which allows us to try and keep on top of any new information or everything as it's changing, because it's changing regularly and sometimes small, sometimes large, and it can be very easy to kind of miss some of these tweaks and changes. So, we get the training module. Also, being a part of an organisation that is a registered provider that looks after, obviously, the audit process, but making sure that we're compliant in regards to all of that means that they make sure that, like going through COVID and everything we've had to do and all the tweaks and changes that keep happening on requirements, they've always helped make sure that we do have things highlighted to us that are most important. So that's been, really good for me, especially as, we are an organisation, but we are still working independently. Like there's only 3 of us or something in Adelaide and most are all on the East Coast. So, I still work from home and am not in an office with people where when stuff comes up, I can instantly talk across the desk. So, of course, using technology like Teams and all of those things and WhatsApp and whatever so that we've got quick access to pick the brains of everybody, of your brain's trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think whilst you mentioned about being at home and the mobile nature of it, how do you sort of handle that? How do you navigate the in the office, the phone calls? We've heard from Ellie who talks about, time blocking and self-care, but how do you go about handling all these things? You're at home, so your own boss as such.
Yeah.
How do you work your own, I don't want to call it book, but how do you work with participants and how do you make sure you get things done and avoid the distractions?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And the very first franchise that I bought that I ran from home, I had showroom or whatever at home. Back then, I was terrible with boundaries, terrible to my own detriment, because they were all new mums mostly that I was dealing with new babies, and some of them would have big issues and they'd want help straight away. And so I would answer the call at any time of the day, any time of the week, and what have you. So by the time I sold that, I started to learn that I need to get better with that. That's still a work in progress. But when I started working support coordination, initially I was working in an office and I was kind of going to and from. But when I came to Auscare, it was all for myself from home or like on my own. And I didn't have great boundaries, and I would answer the call in the supermarket because I didn't want to be the break in the chain that slowed any process down. So I was really trying to make sure by putting my participant first, I guess, because I know that there are so many places that things can get slowed down. And so initially I was like, no, I need to make sure that I do my bit as soon as I can every time, so I keep the process smooth as it can be. But I was driving over to the York Peninsula with my husband for a weekend away. I think we had a couple of the kids with us, and he was talking to me about, I don't know, maybe taking on some more participants or whatever. And I was like, oh no, I think I'm at capacity at the moment for where they're all at. And the more I talk to him, he's a general manager, so he's all about, time management and making things work and, efficiencies. And the more we unpacked it all, the more I realized I've got to put boundaries back really clearly in. And so that's what I did. So by the end of the weekend, I had written out what hours I work on Monday, what hours I work on Tuesday, what hours I work on Wednesday, etc. So I blocked that out through the week, which meant that, and I did that with him because he was able to say, look, this is a good time of the day not to be working. Like Monday mornings, he said, often a lot of people are kind of catching up after the weekend, By Monday afternoon, it's a great time to kind of get in. And Fridays, a lot of people are kind of winding down by the end of the week and what have you. So maybe you have Friday where it's a smaller number of hours. So I do bulk of my hours Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That works really well for me. Wednesday's my biggest day. That's when I'll do a full kind of day. Yes, I have to be flexible because some weeks I don't need to see anybody in person. Some weeks it's just at home. But sometimes it's mixed up. So I also, now that I've got all those hours in, it's really easy for me to combine, obviously, when I am visiting. And I'm much better now at saying I'm available here, here, and here, rather than I could sort of fit them in any time before if I needed to. Because mostly they'll come back to me with one of the times that suits me. So, yeah, I think the scheduling based on the hours you want to do allowed me then the time that I'm not working, that I could actually do whatever it is that I wanted to do. And that doesn't mean I don't throw on the odd load of washing, in between work hours or whatever. But, yeah, it's the scheduling of hours for working from home is crucial. And then the same with blocking in when I'll see participants or whoever it is that I've got to meet up with. I still try and make sure that that's also in when I'm working sort of thing. Because as we know, not everything's billable, but it's all work-related and connected and what have you. So
absolutely. Yeah. It's intriguing. I'm going to delve a little bit more into the home situation as far as, so you've said about boundaries and all that.
Yeah.
Have you got your own desk set aside or what's the setup? How do you know, when are you at home? Because, the home's the house. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
So where's home, where's work? Where do I, leave that little piece of paper in the bin as I walk out? And how do I know I'm now with the kids? Or how do you define that boundary? It's a challenging one. And I know many support coordinators do work independently and do work from home or what have you. And so I think this is a problem for many people. I'd love to know how you handle that.
Yeah, well, I do have an office set up we've sort of got a large living area and then another lounge room. And that lounge room we've sectioned off so that I've got office set up in the corner. which is great because in the window I've got the printer there and, you know, a couple of screens and what have you. So that's definitely sort of my working space. In saying that, I do have a laptop. So sometimes I sit on the lounge if the kids aren't around. And so that still allows me, I don't know, a different view because sometimes it's nice to change that up a little bit. But yeah, I think it's good just by having the hours set. I know when I'm starting the day, if I have set up to have coffee with a friend or whatever that's outside of my work hours, often I'll go out to do that or whatever. So then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I've got to go home to work. So it's kind of, you know, back to front really, isn't it? But yeah, that sort of seems to work pretty well to be at work or not be at work and to not get distracted. That can be challenging. I think it can be challenging for anyone that's working at home. But if you do a bit of Pomodoro maybe here and there, because some of the stuff we do, it's not really set on a time frame. Like it's kind of just stuff you've got to do or whatever. So you do have to put your like thinking cap on or your working cap on and head down, bum up. And so, you know, the old 20, 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, go and put the kettle on, whatever. Then another 25 minutes on seems to be more efficient. So I can get a lot more done in a shorter period of time doing that.
Well, it's quite intriguing that you do say that. It sounds like you clearly have got some ways that you operate. It sounds like you're still refining those, but you're a problem solver, right? So you're probably always getting more effective and efficient as time goes on.
Yeah.
You're also a mother. So you're a mother of 3 children, which is really common actually in this industry. It's very common for, I don't know if it's the kind and caring nature of mothers. I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of mothers that are out there. Yeah. How do you sort of juggle the both roles? So you've got the support coordination, then you've also got, you know, being a mother, and obviously there's a bit of intertwining with it all. How do you sort of juggle all that?
Well, thankfully my older 2 are one's finished high school and the other one's going into year 12. So they're relatively independent, which is good. I try to always be there for school drop-off and pick up for my 11-year-old. But there are the odd occasion where I'll pre-organise that maybe one of the other 2 can grab him or whatever. If I know that I'm, you know, on the other side of town and I am with a participant and I'm not going to be able to be back there in time. I think the beauty of obviously working for myself and working from home is the fact that I can set the time in regards to making sure that I can get him to school, or I can rearrange a day outside of the norm if I need to get there for something else that's on for him.
Like sports days? Or
that's exactly right. Yeah, or pre-COVID when there was assemblies, because there's hardly anything like that at the moment you can go to. But yeah, you know, I think that's why working for myself for so long has always sort of suited me. And the support coordination role kind of, for me, has fitted in really well with that. So that, yeah, if I need to sort of leave earlier and organise the older kids to help, I can. I guess that's a bit of a luxury for me. And, of course, last year we had a lot of lockdown, and this year we've had a bit of lockdown. So helping him with schoolwork from home has been okay. It wouldn't have been as easy if I had, you know, 3 under 10 or 3 under 8 or something.
No, I totally get that. Absolutely. Well, switching off though, you've got children, doesn't matter what age they are, right?
Well, you never switch off from the kids, really. No,
well,
you do.
Maybe not from there, but I suppose what I'm really saying is, like, you know, you've got this emotional support. You're there as a mother that, you know, not just that. Obviously, there's many other good attributes, but, you know, children often expect that from you.
Yes.
You've got a job which requires that in spades, right?
Yeah.
As a support coordinator, you know, often you not enough love as such, as far as, you know, you're always under time pressures to get things done, and there's pressure there. How do you support yourself? How do you make sure that you can show up as a good mother, but also making sure that you're fine? Because you've got multiple roles, right? There's you in this as well. There is 3 roles.
Yeah, that's very true.
Support coordinator, mother, and then you as an individual as well.
Yeah, so. I mean, that's a great question, and particularly on the back of thinking of a couple of different participants that I have that have been more challenging ones. And they can be ones where sometimes it feels like it doesn't matter how, like, you pride yourself on what you do and the way you help coordinate and manage and communicate and make sure all the different services or whatever are communicating and the best is being done. But unfortunately, particularly if you look at in the brain injury space or whatever, when you're dealing with participants, they're not cognitively always able to see what you're doing. And so that sometimes can come back on you. And, well, not when I say come back on you, I hope you know what I mean. I created a prospective budget, for example, for a participant because I'd worked hard on a new change of circumstances to help them with they unfortunately had cancer on top of their disability that had returned. So there are lots of big things. It was a, very big emotional ride, which I'd worked really hard to get on top of. We were successful with the change of circ. We got some great funding. We managed to be able to make sure he's got everything that he needed. I went, right, let's work a prospective budget, worked that all out, helped him with some other parts. And then he took that as me telling him how to spend his money. And he wasn't happy. And this is somebody whose language is completely different to mine anyway. So the way he regularly spoke to me was not great, but that's who he was. And I just understood that along the way. But sometimes you get to where you take it and you take it and you take it, and you have to kind of keep reminding yourself, the position they're in. But like you say, there is you there as well. And you have to, and emotionally it's hard to put the boundaries in sometimes. And sometimes there isn't anything you can do that is actually going to have them see actually what you've done and how you're just helping them the best you can to utilize the funding they've got and how they might be able to. So, yeah, I think debriefing a little bit with my husband helps. Plenty of walking if I need to get out and just sort of go for a walk and maybe listen to a podcast or listen to an audio book or whatever. Something, a bit uplifting and inspiring because, it is a heavy role and, lots of people you can just have great rides with and have great successes, but sometimes the journey's a little bit more treacherous and not just from the participant perspective, like just with NDIS and with changes and now we went this and delays and emotions of the families that are, so you're kind of on that ride with them. So trying to support them through that while stepping away sometimes to support yourself. Sometimes there are some participants that it's best for you to go, okay, I've done everything I can for you to this point. I know that I'm your 5th support coordinator and your last one, you sacked after 24 hours. So I think we've done a great job so far and I am happy to sort of bless and release you onto where might be the next best stage. And then you have to kind of cut that for yourself so that you can look after yourself too.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of self-awareness there. You are aware of the things that you do enjoy. You go out and you have walks or you debrief with your husband and whoever that might be that you go and do it with. But that sounds really important. And I'm hearing a theme of expectation management being a big, big one here. Obviously, I'm in the industry as well. I know all about that. Yeah. I'd love to hear from yourself, though. Expectation management. How do you go about that? How do you keep expectations in check? Obviously, you're talking just before about there's times where you're actually with them and they can actually see what's happening. So you're with the person, they can see what you're doing, and there's times you're doing work in the background. Now, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it happens. Now, that'll be music to many support coordinators.
Yeah, that's right.
How do you manage expectations? And there's many bodies, right? Like sometimes you can be in touch with 6 or 8, 10 people, 15 people even, for one person. How do you then manage expectations? Across the board.
I think, again, it comes down to communication. Like mostly it's just trying to make sure that you talk through whatever it is that's happening. It's why I quite like to do the prospective budgets for them because I feel like that's a little bit of a gap kind of thing as far as it's not the plan manager's role to tell them how to spend the money. It's not the support coordinator's role to tell them how to spend the money, but it certainly is somebody that can help support, okay, this is what the funding you've got, this is what it could look like, or, the way it's been budgeted, the way it could, so that they at least maximize what they've got and they don't finish without using as much as they should, or the opposite and use it way too soon and then find that they're really in trouble. So helping them with expectations around does it actually look like that they've currently got, working out together, do we need further evidence to prove that this isn't actually enough for what they need? They need more than that for X, Y, Z reasons. And then finding the evidence to prove that so that you can then go back for either that review or that change of circumstance if it's happening later on, or you've taken them on further down because they've had somebody else and then you've come on. And then communicating along the way as far as what you're doing and where things are at, whether it's over the phone or text or email, whatever is the best communication method for them, so that they always know whatever the parts are that they need help with. Because once you get supports in place and they're plodding along, that's okay. But if there's key things that they're needing, you need to keep them in the loop And you need scheduling in ahead of things, because unfortunately you do need to kind of keep back in at the NDIS sometimes to make sure that things are still progressing. And if you just rely on them to get back to you, you can wait a long time before you find, you actually need something. So I think letting them know what we're doing, as well as, like, I've got one participant here whose nominee's his brother, and he's in Brisbane. And so I've never met his brother in person. I have just always communicated via phone and email, but I'm constantly letting him know what's happening here, or including him on certain emails that I'm communicating with a lot of the providers, but not too much to overwhelm him. And he said a couple of times that we'd be lost without you. Like, just as long as they know what's going on. I think some providers don't manage expectations very well in reverse either. They give expectations that then they just can't live up to. Communication is key. Most people, if they know what to expect, even if it's longer than they wanted, will be fine with that as long as you're honest about it.
Yeah.
So it's when people give unrealistic expectations on something and then can't deliver, it's the old overpromise, underdeliver. Like, you can't be saying you can do something that you don't even know that you can. But certainly keeping the nominee or participant or both in the loop as you're working through whatever it is that they're needing.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of hearing a theme there of feeling understood, a lot of communication, which is really transparency. I know from my own personal experience working with, I've got a couple of family members, as I've probably said before, that are on the NDIS, and when I've been working with our support coordinators, what's been fantastic is when I get updates of what's happening. I've got a life that I've got to live as well. I absolutely love my family members and I want them to go well, but when I know where they're at, and we've got people that sort of take and lighten the load, because you can't be doing everything for everyone. It's made a huge difference. And whilst we're sort of talking, so not so much about expectations, but bad recommendations. So what are bad recommendations, or where do you see support coordinators go wrong?
Well, I have taken over some participants from support coordinators that haven't done their due diligence to make sure that the right processes have been, so if you take them on and it ends up you believe something is in the process of being approved or waiting on approval, a couple of key ones kind of come to mind. Sometimes it takes the NDIS a while to actually explain to you that you don't have everything or whatever. So I think some support coordinators aren't making sure they understand exactly what the NDIS needs to make sure they gather that together and get it through to them. And when that happens, it, accentuates the delay that you can have on approval. The NDIS is amazing and a government-run organisation that's sometimes frustrating. But it's a pretty amazing kind of platform and scheme that is changing lives, but they need us to work with them as well. And so I think, some support coordinators aren't following up enough either with the NDIS or not scheduling ahead to make sure they follow up, and communicating regularly enough between, because often, like say it's home modifications or I don't know, that's just a great example because it's often a few different people that you're trying to coordinate to get it done, and understanding who's putting it in and that everything that's required is getting put in. Sometimes you have to sort of be on them, and that's sort of part of the role of the support coordinator. Because unfortunately not all nominees have the time, as much as, like you're saying, they love the child or the parent or the sibling that they're a nominee for, but they often are working full-time or doing whatever. And if somebody needs a support coordinator, it's because they need somebody to sort of oversee a lot of those things. And if support coordinators are relying on everybody to be doing all their bit, then they're not going to get the results that they want, and the participant's going to miss out.
So it sounds like a lot of sort of following up and just making sure that things go well, because everything goes plan and the plan's good until the plan falls apart. Right? So it's like we've got the plan, then there's reality, something happens at home or whatever else it is, or there's something that's scheduled and someone's sick, and then that's the appointment you've been planning for a month, and now you've actually got to reset that one. So those sorts of things, being versatile, and sounds like a bit of a follow-up system as well to make sure that it's all, like planning's a big theme that I'm sort of hearing from yourself. Yeah,
definitely. I think planning on your way through and sort of trying to just keep on top. And this might come up later, but not taking on more than you should take on.
Yeah.
Because you've got to be honest with yourself about what you can do well and make sure that you're on top of. And if you keep saying yes, 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 then you might end up where, you drop the ball without meaning to and without it being intentional. And I'm by no means perfect. And, there's been a couple where I've chased up, the NDIS, and each time I've chased up, I've found that I didn't get all the information I needed. And then when I finally found it out, I thought, and I felt like I should have, had them tell me that in the first place, but I left it another couple of weeks before I rang back again. And I've delayed that because I didn't get them to tell me information earlier, or that you actually needed this. So now I can chase up getting that. But, so sometimes I've made the process longer, although that's the key thing. I try to make sure that whatever it is I'm coordinating, I'm keeping on top of it to make it as fast as it possibly can, with all the delays of the other components that are naturally there.
So being as proactive as you possibly can be. I'm quite curious, actually, and I think some others might be that are maybe planning on jumping into this industry or already are working. What's a particular participant journey look like? And so as a support coordinator, like let's just say we've got Jane, and if we've got Jane, like how much do you see Jane at the start, middle and end? I know it depends upon disabilities and all that, but let's roll with it. Let's say we've got Jane. What's it look like, throughout, I don't know, let's throw it out, maybe 20 hours in a plan. We're a bit more lucky. Some are 12, right? We know that's
12. Well, what can you do in 12?
So what sort of look like, as far as going out and seeing them? Or I'd love to go through an end-to-end if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Obviously, it depends partly on whether you've taken them on partway through or if it's their first plan or not. But if Jane, for example, is first plan. So this is an example of one that I have had earlier this year where I actually helped them just before to actually do the planning meeting, the original meeting to get an NGO's plan approved.
So access, yeah?
Yeah, access. So fortunate for us, this was a very good friend of our CEO who said, no, I want you to help them and, I'll make sure that you get sort of reimbursed a bit to be able to help out, but I need them to get support. So I was like, yeah, that's fine. So I went out initially for a meeting before we were going to have the planning meeting, and I just made sure we went through all of the questions and he had, all the answers and what have you. Then we had the planning meeting. Then we got the plan through. So then I went out to sort of go through and do an implementation of, okay, this is sort of what we were hoping for and wanted. This is sort of what we got. Like we said about priorities, what are the things that were most important to them? And then I went away and created a proposed budget schedule for the 12 months or the 2 years. In this case, it was 12 months that we had, so that we went, all right, well, we haven't necessarily got all the things that we would like to have, but this is the first plan and we need to probably have a bit more evidence in some spaces. So we kept that in mind for how we can utilize some of the funding. Yeah, and then I just started researching appropriate supports for him. He was interested in looking for work, so I actually found a support worker that was excellent and very proactive as well in looking up other places where they could do some work experience and some things like that. So they went through sort of doing that. The budget changes obviously as you go through the year, but you can kind of keep tweaking that as to where you're up to. And then we have organised an OT functional capacity assessment for this participant because we didn't have that before.
So at the start, we're doing that early doors, or because I know that some support coordinators get done right at the start, some just before plan review. Because it's the first plan, we're doing it at the start, or where we're sort of going with it?
Again, I think every case probably varies. If he had way too little funding for what he really needed, we probably would have prioritised getting that done really early. It wasn't a huge plan, but it was enough for somebody that was early 50s and had never had, a plan or any other sort of supports really. So I wanted to start by utilising some of the funding that we had and just make sure that, so March is when the plan began. So it's next March that we'll have review. And I wanted to just make sure that we had that assessment and evidence for the new plan. And because we had sort of proposed the money and the funding and what we're going to, it's worked quite well to get us through this year, to implement some good activities for him. He's starting to get a bit more involved in the community. talking with the DES provider, hopefully looking at other options for work, so that for the next plan, we've got a different set of goals and a different way to approach the needs and more evidence, because we couldn't do the OT assessment before because they didn't have the funding for it. Right at the beginning, we didn't necessarily need it straight away, like I said, unless it was really low funding. But we definitely need it for him by the end so that we've got it for review time.
Yeah. And so I'm sort of hearing that at the start we're a bit...
It's definitely more heavy. Yeah, it's definitely heavier. Yeah.
So if we sort of say start, middle and end, what's it look like as far as the work without going into astronomical detail? I know that there's a lot involved, right?
Yeah. And as you said...
It depends on hours and stuff like that as well, of course.
Participants have different levels of needs, but it's always heavier at the start, you know, the 6 to 10-ish hours in the beginning and your same sort of thing at the end. Because this one has been a first plan, it has been a little heavier throughout than what they necessarily always are, because you've either got to prepare for your review at the end. The more work you can put in that last 6 to 10 weeks before the planning meeting, the better you can make the job for the planner. And the easier you make the job for the planner, the better the result. In my experience, you're more likely to get. If you rely on kind of throwing them a few bits last minute and then having to get them too much after, the more you can have prepared. It's almost like the more of the planning meeting you can do for them, the more that you can come in and they're like, oh, wow, oh, my God, this is amazing. Like, you know, so the more prepared you are, the more, I don't know, it just seems to feel like the more they go into bat for you. Because often they're speaking to a delegate. Often, if it's an LAC, they're often speaking to a delegate to you have to sort of fight for certain areas. And because each participant's different, even with the same diagnosis, they need completely different things. So you need to be able to evidence why one needs one thing over somebody else. And if you've got the right information beforehand, mostly I've found it's been pretty successful to be able to get what you need for them with the planning meeting.
Yeah, no, I'm hearing a theme with all of that. I don't know, we've gone through how much sort of work's involved, heavy at the front, heavy at the back end and all that. But there's a real theme throughout of, I'm hearing partnership. It's not necessarily a guide because, you know, they're participants, the expert in their own life, but like really having that sort of partnership. And with that partnership, it means that, you know, it just makes the journey a bit easier. Whereas if they're going in, I've heard of situations before where a participant will have a plan in place with the support coordinator and then they'll get a phone call or something will happen and then they'll start another service and you've done your budget and whatever else it is and it's throwing things out left field. Plan managers now getting involved, all different sorts of stuff about things not working. So it sounds like that real partnership is something that's key that you really utilise to make sure that things go in the right direction.
Yeah. I think the working together and, you know, trying to always listen. I think it's listen. You always have to be listening to what they need and want, but also kind of being proactive and working out who is it they need to see to determine maybe, you know, what they want or what they need, because you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes you could benefit from certain services. Speech is a great example. You know, I've got a participant who has an intellectual disability and they've had speech, but to me they talk quite well. And so I sort of thought speech is helping people talk, right? But when I came up for doing a change of circ for them because they are, you know, actually going to be out of funding and we needed to make sure they still had supports, I organised a report from the speech therapist so that we had hopefully sufficient speech in the new plan. And when I read through the report, I was like, oh, wow, you know, it's a lot more about communication and how they can, you know, all the different ways that you can help them to be able to have more confidence and be more able to participate in community and all of that. So the more you understand through the therapists how they can help your participants, the more you can make sure, not that we're advocating because we're not allowed to advocate, but the more that we try to make sure we are ensuring that they are even aware of what's available to them and what could benefit them, because they may not know, but there's lots of great allied health professionals out there that can let you know how they could help, that then you know to then ask for it and hopefully get it, or just help guide them then on how they'll spend their funding for what will benefit them most.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a funny theme in regards to the different therapies and what they do and the understanding, because it's something that's come up quite a lot in regards to, you know, what does an occupational therapist do versus a physio?
Yes.
Or what's the need of a social worker? And I'm often talking to support coordinators about, did you know that social workers can actually do a fair bit of the stuff that's done by an occupational therapist? And did you know in pediatrics, as an example, you can have physiotherapy and occupational therapy and speech often work very closely together in that area.
Yes.
And in that sphere, it's like, physio and an OT overlap a lot in pediatrics. But then when you sort of get into working with adults, it's maybe not quite as much.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating about that, because we're sort of thinking about getting some videos together or just a bit more of an education series about
what very beneficial.
Just about make sure that everyone's on the same page. And it's not just about having it there for support coordinators and participants to understand, because often I think the theme is that, physiotherapy or occupational therapy might be discussed, but some of these other therapies aren't discussed, as an example, like developmental educators.
We had a good conversation, I think, a few months ago about DEs.
Exactly. So, very different as far as that. And I suppose on that note, I'm very interested. We're talking about some gaps and areas for improvement. I think where we were going earlier before we started was maybe about access, but I'd love, in regards to NDIS, how can we help if there are gaps? How can we help improve that, and where do you see the problems lie, I guess?
Yeah, I think there's there's probably lots of gaps. Definitely helping participants to get onto the NDIS. It's very challenging. I have one participant that I look after. It's just a little boy. He's just turned 4, actually, but he lives with his mum and his grandmother and his uncle, so his mum's brother. The little boy, the uncle, and the grandmother are all on the NDIS. The mum isn't, but the mum could really benefit from being on there too. I think she's applied 3 times and has been knocked back every time. And it's really heartbreaking, because the other area that I see they could really do with help is almost a case manager or a family. And I've researched and spoken to so many different organisations to try and find who is the person that can come in and help her, who's clearly struggling to get the support she needs. A 3-year-old doesn't get support workers. They don't get funding. They don't tend to get a lot of funding in core unless they're in a wheelchair and they need to have carers. Mostly, so many things come under parental responsibility. And
topical.
Very topical.
Very topical.
And so if that's the case, what if mum really needs help? So I think whether it's the NDIS needs to be able to have a service where people can walk through those, because typically if people need it, they need it for a reason. And sometimes it means that they aren't able to understand everything they need to do. So I think certainly help to get onto the NDIS. I think case management, I don't even know from a government perspective where that all comes in. But
I remember we were talking earlier before the podcast, we're talking about, you're talking about case manager, who sits between it all, right? So you've got a support coordinator who's, they're not telling people what to do, right?
No.
You've got a plan manager paying the bills, say, then you've got, maybe some core supports providers, support workers, you've got some allied health professionals, maybe from different companies and that as well. Who keeps all that together and navigate that? I suppose many would argue, hey, a support coordinator is sort of meant to keep the ship all going, but it's all only as good as the transparency as well. Is that sort of where you were going earlier?
That's right. No, I think so, because, particularly when you've got a plan that has 12 hours or 20 hours of support coordination, and, like I said, you need a certain amount at the beginning, a certain amount at the end, and that doesn't necessarily – so there is not a lot of time to be really working, supporting and coordinating. Like, this little boy has a team from Novita that is their speech occupational therapist and physio. So I'm grateful that he has at least a team from an organisation that do work all together on the case. And so that helps me to be able to help from that perspective. But like I said, mum's struggling, but I'm employed with hours to help the child. I help the mum as much as I can help them. But there still needs to be somebody else within that sort of framework. And everything is so separate as far as kind of the support coordination, the plan management, the plan management team, it is choice and control. So as far as what people are going to spend the funding sort of on, they need to make sure they're doing the right thing, but it's not always them making the decision, or it shouldn't always be the support coordinator. I feel like sometimes there's a gap. I mean, lots of support coordinators don't necessarily do this budgeting. But a lot of participants can't work that out for themselves.
Well, financial literacy, it's not that far to out. I know there's been a huge barefoot investor movement and all that sort of stuff. So financial literacy.
It's hard for people across the board is bad.
It is, right?
Yeah.
It's challenging. So
That's
getting
right.
that together, you'd like to think you'd be able to call your LAC and you'd have someone from, Mission Australia or Care, whatever it might be, pick up. But, you're not.
But they're all overworked. LACs are all overworked. They don't have time. The financial literacy side, I think, is huge. Understanding how that works and what it looks like and being able to juggle it and navigate it. Yeah, they might get their monthly statements, but I don't know how much they look at them. I had another participant that I took on who had a rollover plan, like an extension of 12 months that was July 19, I think it rolled over. No, 20, middle of COVID.
Yeah.
And then rolled over again middle of this year. And when it just sort of goes to an extension, it's like whatever they had, it gets added on to as if it was a 2-year plan, but it becomes that amount again. And then it's happened a third time. But they've almost spent very little of sort of their funding, but they didn't realize they don't know the numbers. The parents are elderly.
Yeah, right.
And nobody's really explained it to them. So I've helped them try to go, okay, they've had something happen to Dad where he now can't drive. Poor eyesight, he's now had his license taken away. They've relied on him. So I'm like, that's okay. We can do this. And like, oh, but that's going to cost. I'm like, yes, but you've got this funding here. And that's what it's there for, to help support you with this. And, they don't know. And they struggle with trying to communicate with the NDIS. Sending emails and all of that just makes everything take a lot longer. So as frustrating as it can be, and a lot of people don't like getting on the phone anyway, but getting on the phone will often get you a quicker result and certainly answers quicker, even if you do it again in 2 weeks and there's a 2-week delay because they didn't tell you what they should have last time. Getting on the phone again then, sometimes sending the documents while you're on the phone with them and having them upload documents, because that can all take ages if you rely on it being emailed in and, picked up. Consents and all of those things. The number of times I've had them go, oh, do we have consents? I can go back and tell them the date and the time I sent the consent, which may have been 3 months before or whatever, but it didn't end up getting uploaded or what have you.
It's ever so frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, so I really feel for the participants or the families of the participants that are trying to navigate something that is quite complex and make sure that they're getting what they need and then maximising what they get.
Absolutely. And I've got another one. I know we've covered this a little bit. I've got a question here that goes around the stresses and constant obstacles. We've spoken about self-care, and I suppose what I'm really interested in is when things are going left, right, like as in phone call, email, whatever else it might be. Oh, you're late to your next home visit or whatever else it is. Yeah. How do you handle that? Like as in, with all these things coming left, right, we've talked about, self-care, we've talked about that, but I'm like, well, is it just having good systems? You plan a lot. Are you a bit unique like that? Or?
Oh, no, I'm probably not unique. And I probably don't plan enough. I probably do rely a lot still on keeping my caseload manageable. And
diary though?
No, electronic diary. So obviously I put in from that perspective. Yeah. And I have to rely on that to be able to, because I can't remember.
I was going to say, if you rely on memory, geez, I know you might be super mum, but wow, memory of all these different phone calls and everything, that's tough, right?
Yeah, no, obviously as far as scheduling, all of that sort of thing, and even follow-ups or whatever, if I need to have all of that, I make sure I try and put that in. But, yeah, sometimes it does get a bit all over the place. And because you're working with multiple different people, I tend to try and minimise how many I'm working with on a given day. And luckily that's sort of the way it works anyway. Some people don't need you at all for a while, and so you might be just calling with them to check in. But I try to do my notes as much as I can while either straight after sort of the meeting or soon after, sometimes during.
Typing? Are you writing or are you doing
mostly
audio
typing.
Notes even? Who knows?
Oh, I've done audio, definitely.
Yeah.
Because that's easy to then sort of play back. Sometimes I'm just writing because sometimes it's more general, so I'm just sort of writing, notes, and sometimes I'll sit there at the end of the day and just kind of get in the zone and do it and go through kind of my list and And I mean, email and text messaging, the more you can keep that is digital, the more you've got to be able to refer back to. So I do like to check back through the emails and go, oh, yep, I hadn't done that one. Yeah. So because I do find it's not always easy to note take, like in, say, we use CareView immediately as you're doing it, and you don't want to leave it, too long later. But like you say, between phone call and email, and you get interrupted, but they all kind of need to be noted and written down. So sometimes it is just a bit over the place.
The back of the hand every now and then.
Yeah, that works well. Yeah, that's right. Don't forget.
Oh, it's really challenging as to how to do it. It sounds like you've got a few different tips and tricks that you use there to really keep yourself organised, albeit that you want to get a little bit more.
Yes.
I think we've come to that time. We've got the final question.
Okay.
Right, so the final question of the podcast is, let's pretend that we're 20 years into the future.
Wow.
20 years. We've achieved success in the disability sector.
Yeah.
What does it look like? What does it feel like? Paint me a picture.
Oh, well, I remember when I first started reading a big article about, an ordinary life, like living this ordinary life, which is a key thing which always sounds ridiculous, right? Because you're talking about these people with a disability that are living an ordinary life. It's like, why wouldn't you want them to live an amazing life? And maybe that will be what it is for them. But I think that in 20 years' time, if we're successful, we have great integration within, society and out and about, so that they are free to go out as much as they choose that they want to go out, have full accessibility to be able to do that without having to feel like it's challenging or that they're, making things more difficult or whatever, and have the supports and what have you that they need in place, so that they're not lonely and they have certainly the self-care help that they need. And sometimes that's even, with aging parents that feel like they want to help them forever, but know that they're going to be at a point where they can't. So, yeah, I think it'd be great to think that we have that full accessibility and an ordinary life for everyone, so that everybody's able to have access to do what it is that they need and want, socialise and catch up with people or meet new people or learn new, access to different courses and things that they might want to do just to add. Because for all of us as we get older, even if we're not somebody that has a disability, we want to be able to enjoy our day-to-day, we want to feel like we have a bit of a purpose or we have something to contribute or something that makes us happy. So, yeah, even if you could retire tomorrow, who'd want to sit home and do nothing?
Yeah.
And so these guys are the same, that they also have goals and dreams. And I want them to be able to believe and know that that's halfway to now achieving, because physically nothing is removed from them, from whatever it is they want to do.
Well, that's really inspiring. I'm hearing out of all that hopes, aspirations, and really connection. I think beyond all, like connected everywhere. Yeah. We don't have to, we've got all these days, these campaigns and all that go on to raise awareness.
Yeah.
But we're just so integrated that disability is everyone's problem. And maybe not problem, but, it's our discussion point and all that. It sounds, wow, that's really got me moved there.
Well, I think it's in the aged care system as well. I think that, both of those spaces need to go back to a more community base of living and life, because loneliness is a problem in the aged care sector. And so connection, I think, is key. Yeah.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree anymore. We've been talking to Kirsty Bonner, a proud and passionate support coordinator from Auscare Support. Kirsty, where can people go to learn more about what you do?
They can go to, I think it's just auscaresupport.com. Yeah.
Not to worry. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.